We have never been more connected, and yet we've never been more alone. It's been called a loneliness epidemic. And if you've ever opened your phone, scrolled for 10 minutes, put it down, and felt emptier than before, you already know what that means. It's not an epidemic. It's a mechanism. And the reason behind it is far stranger than I expected. This video is about loneliness, and about what happens when you live in a world full of mirrors, and none of them actually mirror you. At the beginning of my 20s, I went through a period where I felt deeply alone. I had a strong need to express myself and connect with others, but at the same time I felt like I didn't have the tools to do it. The tools the world offered me were almost infinite, so much so that I often convinced myself that all it would take was the right post on the right subreddit, or the right photo on the right platform to finally break out of the pit I felt I'd fallen into. But it was only fantasy. Despite the endless possibilities at my disposal, loneliness kept swallowing me whole, the way the sky swallows a kite. Here's what I think is actually going on. I think this feeling of infinite possibilities is itself a kind of prison. The problem is the ideal version of ourselves that modern life never stops feeding us. Being constantly exposed to other people's lives means being constantly exposed to models, successful people, perfect relationships, the right opinions. We instinctively know what the right photo looks like, the right caption, or the right attitude. The bubbles we live in do nothing but reinforce the image of what we are supposed to be, in a vicious cycle that produces a growing sense of powerlessness. We will never be that ideal self, and neither will the people who seem to be. We continuously internalize models of what works and what doesn't, widening the gap between who we are and who we think we need to become. Social networks accelerate this process in an almost Darwinian way. They select the messages that confirm the niches, amplify the bubbles in their convictions, and hand the user back a version of the world populated by unreachable ideal selves. Finally, I realized I had stopped trying to connect. Something else had taken its place, and I still didn't have a name for it. At some point, the ghosts had started to crowd me out. I couldn't move forward in my life because I already knew the shape I was supposed to fit, what I was supposed to feel, and everything I did, I measured against it before I even did it. Other people's image isn't just an external model, it becomes an internal voice. And yes, that voice exists in real-life relationships too, but in that case it's mediated by experience, by intersubjectivity, by the ability to read nuance. Online, it arrives clean, frictionless, and it's much harder to argue with. Nothing that's smooth is free. Most of what we see online is aimed at selling your image, your brand, your ideas, selling a posture, a version of yourself convincing enough to generate attention. The audience rewards what works, and the algorithm pushes what the audience rewards. But the algorithm has no aesthetic and no ethics. It has a metric. To succeed, you have to find your niche, and do whatever it takes to make that niche love you. Whether your audience is a fan base, an employer, or someone swiping past your face in half a second, in a vicious cycle of content that resembles itself, because it's built to please the largest possible number of people within it, on pain of being ignored by the algorithm. All of this looked like a masquerade, and I had a mask too, pleasant, easy to like, and lonely to wear. And every time I wore it, a little harder to tell apart from my own face. In the abyss of the desperation that loneliness had become, I finally understood. My true reflection was unseen. Maybe this is what conformism actually looks like. A slow convergence toward the same handful of models, until what looks back is never quite a face. My loneliness had grown from exactly this conformism. I convinced myself I knew what worked, as if I could anticipate what others expected, constantly trying to figure out what pose to strike for my bubble. What looks like diversity is often just a wider selection of identical doors. 100 subcultures, each certain it has escaped the mainstream, each running the same operating system underneath. The aesthetic changes. The submission to a script does not. What are memes, if not conformism? And so I adapted, took the path of least resistance. And every time I did it, something that didn't translate was left behind. No one could love my afterimage. Those ways of being never felt fully mine. I couldn't reduce myself to a simple set of rules. Maybe the breaking point was simply inevitable. At some point, life left me no choice and put me in front of a fork in the road. Dying, hiding in the comfort zone, or try to open myself to the world. You see, this kind of loneliness is a silent parasite. It learns to simulate social functionality. You can interact with others, seem almost functional, but inside, you stay disconnected. And it's a way of living that simply isn't sustainable in the long run. Choosing that comfort zone means accepting you'll end your days isolated, one step at a time. So I tried. For the first time, I took a real job, and what for many was just normal life, for me was a violent shock therapy. It forced me to be around other human beings. At first it was an enormous effort. I felt strange, out of place, inadequate. The work itself didn't magically solve my problems with loneliness, but it did something more important. It forced me to experiment with myself. Day by day, I started opening up, letting a few real parts of myself show through. Small, isolated fragments. And then something happened that I didn't expect. I discovered that, every so often, those fragments were picked up. For the first time, I felt mirrored by someone else. Felt some part of me echo in another human being. And it was reciprocal. Sometimes it was me picking up someone else's fragments. In those exchanges, without either of us noticing, we enriched each other. So I learned to measure myself, to understand what I like, to read the room, not to let it bend me. I gathered courage, little by little, disliked by some, liked by others. And in that feedback, I began to actually recognize myself. I started recognizing the old patterns, the pull of a pose. I understood that you can echo with anyone, and not everyone receives you the same way, and that the only way to find the right people was to stop performing a part. The more spontaneous I was, the more I attracted the right people. But naturalness has a price. I had to learn to say what I actually thought, accepting the risk of friction, learning over time to love it. Because even friction says something. I understood that how others judge us is their task, not ours. The courage to be happy also includes the courage to be disliked. When you have gained that courage, your interpersonal relationships will all at once change into things of lightness,